Really excited to talk to Alex Kennedy, hoopshype.com, about all the storylines entering, which there's some really intriguing matchups, Alex. Before we dive into them, other than Oklahoma City, Houston, which is like epic for a first-round matchup with those two guys, which series intrigues you the most?
Well, to me, there's one in both conferences. In the Western Conference, Clippers-Jazz is really interesting to me. These are both 51-win teams that are well-rounded. I think both of these teams are better than their record indicates. Utah is kind of a dark horse that plays really well on both ends of the floor. The Clippers, they had some injuries. Blake Griffin and Chris Paul both missed 20 games. So I think they're a legitimate contender that probably would have won, more games had they been completely healthy. So I like that series a lot. I think they match up well. It should be fun basketball. And then in the Eastern Conference, honestly, the series that I'm most excited for in the East is Toronto-Milwaukee. I know I told you recently that this Bucks team intrigues me, Giannis Antetokounmpo especially, but we also know that Toronto sometimes in the postseason doesn't show up, or they struggle shooting the ball, or things like that. So really that's the one in the East that kind of stands out to me.
Yeah, I want to talk about that one too, because I agree with you there. But let's first take a look at the game that you mentioned, or the matchup you mentioned, Utah and the Clippers, because a lot of people, Alex, and you wrote about this, Blake Griffin said that they knew that this would be a matchup that could be coming in the first round. And a lot of people think that if the Clippers lose this series, that they could be done as we know them.
Yeah, I mean, it's possible. I just interviewed Blake Griffin, and we kind of talked about the sense of urgency, not only because you have Chris Paul and Blake Griffin both hitting unrestricted free agency this summer, but, Paul's getting older. Blake Griffin is 28 years old. DeAndre Jordan's getting older. This is a core that's been together for quite some time now, and I think there's a sense that if this isn't the year they go on, a really deep run, we could see them make some significant changes and maybe look to change their roster or change their approach to building this team. So I definitely think there's a sense of urgency there. Whereas a team like Utah, they're almost playing with house money. This is their first postseason experience for most of their players. They didn't make it last year. They were just outside the playoffs. They're a team that is entering this series with, far fewer expectations. Guys like Rudy Gobert and Gordon Hayward, these are younger guys. Whereas LA, I think all the pressure is on them. So it's going to be interesting. I think LA is the more talented team. They have home court advantage, and they've been playing really well lately. They finished the season winning 11 of the last 13 games and beating teams like the Spurs and the Rockets and the Wizards and teams like that. And they beat the Jazz too. So, this is a team that's playing really well, but certainly there's pressure on them. And they're another team that in the playoffs, they've disappeared at times. They've lost some series that they shouldn't have, or given up leads in series when it seemed like they were going to advance, and they didn't.
Talking with Alex Kennedy here. Let me ask you about the Clippers. It's funny, I have a buddy of mine, and I have a little bet going on. He gave me 4 teams, and he took the field, all right? I got Golden State, Cleveland. Those two I feel pretty good. My other 2 teams I took were San Antonio. Now, this bet is going back to December. I took the Clippers. Do you put the Clippers as a legitimate title contender?
Yeah, I do. Obviously, I think they're a notch below the first 3 teams you mentioned. I think Golden State, San Antonio, and Cleveland have separated themselves. But then once you get to that next group, I think you're looking at a team like Houston that people have doubts about. That style of play, shooting that many threes and not being able to play great defense. People are wondering how that's going to translate into the playoffs. People point to the Warriors and say, oh, they're a three-point shooting team and they won, a championship, but they're a three-point shooting team that plays really good defense too. And that's really key. So I'm not sure if Houston is going to be able to win a championship. And like I said, LA, they got hot at the right time. They're completely healthy now, which they haven't been in years past. And I think one thing too about this Clippers team is that they have the continuity. Some people look at it as a negative because they brought back the same team every single year, but there's something to be said for having that chemistry and having that same core group of guys that have been there, 4 or 5 years now. They know how to play with each other. They know where each other wants the ball on the floor. And Blake kind of talked about that in the interview too, that really that's an advantage that some of these other teams don't have. Teams like Golden State, they're trying to get Kevin Durant acclimated still. San Antonio made changes with Pau Gasol and LaMarcus Aldridge last year. Houston made a lot of changes. These other contenders, they're not, they don't have the chemistry and continuity that the Clippers have. So it is possible that helps LA, in the postseason. Now, this is a team that hasn't been past the second round, so it's hard to say they're going to win it all and make that prediction. But I think when they're playing their best basketball when they're healthy, they're certainly a scary team to watch.
All right, we got that's a really good one. I took the Jazz in 6 over the Clippers, by the way, in that one. How about the Rockets and the Thunder? Let's dive into this one because I think the NBA, with all of the tanking, all of the stars sitting, said, okay, you guys have been complaining. Chew on this one in the first round. Rockets, Thunders, how entertaining?
I think it's going to be a lot of fun just because of the James Harden, Russell Westbrook matchup. But unfortunately, I think it's going to be a pretty short series. I think Houston is a much more talented team than Oklahoma City. The reason Russell Westbrook is able to average a 30-point triple-double is because he has the ball in his hands almost the entire game. And, yeah, he does have some help. I don't want to, underrate guys like Victor Oladipo and Steven Adams and Enes Kanter. Those are good players, but you look at this Houston team and the core that's around James Harden is certainly better. And not only, do they have, guys like Ryan Anderson and Nene and Eric Gordon, who's played great basketball, they went out the trade deadline to add even more talent in Lou Williams. So I like this Houston team a lot. I think they're a much better team than Oklahoma City, and they're more well-rounded. If Harden has an off game, they have other guys they can turn to. If Westbrook has an off game, the Thunder are going to lose and probably lose badly. So I think it comes down to, can they slow down Russell Westbrook? And even if they can't, even if he puts up crazy numbers and averages a triple-double and all that, it wouldn't surprise me if they were able to let Westbrook go get his numbers and still find a way to contain the other guys and win the series in 5 or 6 games.
I know this might sound ridiculous, but is the best way for Oklahoma City to win this series having Westbrook go for triple-doubles, or do they need to spread some things out more and have more contributions from Oladipo or Kanter, the secondary players?
See, I think there's a happy medium. You almost need both, and I know that's a tough answer to give, a bad answer to give. But honestly, you look at the regular season, they did have a really good record when he had triple doubles. I want to say they only lost 8 or 9 games when he had triple doubles, and he had obviously over 40. He was dominant, and they did win those games. But I think that when he had triple doubles, it was also, because he was getting other guys involved. There were times where he had, 10 to 15 assists during the game, and that's going to get guys like Oladipo and Adams involved. So they almost go hand in hand. You don't want Westbrook scoring 40 points, 50 points. I think that's a problem because then the other guys aren't involved. But with a triple-double, he's rebounding, he's passing to others, and other guys are scoring. So I think, you can have both. But, you almost want him to go for the, 20-point, 15 assist, 15 rebound triple-double and play good defense. Rather than, go for the 50-point triple-double. It seems crazy that we're saying that. He's made triple-doubles seem so common now that we're just kind of picking and choosing what kind of triple-double he has. I know it sounds ridiculous, but it does make more sense to get the other guys involved. Against a Houston team that's very well-rounded, and they can score the ball so well. They can put up 120, 130 points. And if Russell Westbrook has to try to do that alone and try to, outscore this Houston team alone, he's not going to be able to do it, especially over the course of a full series.
Yeah, it sounds like you like the Rockets a little easier than I do. I got the Rockets in 7, but it sounds like you like them pretty easy in this series.
Yeah, I say, 5 or 6 games. I think Westbrook's going to have a monster series, but he needs help there. In this offseason, they're going to try to address that. So, if we talk the two series we talked about, I would say Houston in, 6 games, and then I would say the Clippers in 7 games. But that one I can really see going either way. I wouldn't be surprised if Utah did win in 6, like you said.
The Spurs and the Warriors, do the Grizzlies or the Blazers have any path to victory?
I don't really think so. I think if either team does, it's Portland, just because I'm not a big Memphis fan. I'm not, they struggle at the end of the year, losing, 7 or last 10 games entering the postseason. They have had some injuries. Obviously Chandler Parsons all year has been injured. Tony Allen is now out indefinitely. I don't give Memphis any chance, to be completely honest with you. Portland is always intriguing to me because, they're this young team that seems to step up in the postseason. Damian Lillard plays great basketball in the playoffs. CJ McCollum has done the same thing. They're a team that can knock down threes. And that's always scary in the playoffs because, you can be a team that's not as talented but get hot at the right time. That's what you want if you're a 7 or 8 seed and you're trying to make a run. You don't necessarily want that if you're, a top team and if you can't defend, as I was saying with Houston. It doesn't do well in a, championship run, but in terms of winning a series and advancing and surprising people, that's kind of how you pull off the upset. So I think Portland maybe can win a game. I think that this Warriors team is just too good. But Portland may be able to keep the games closer than people think and maybe steal one.
All right. Alex Kennedy is with us, writer for hoopshype.com. Check him out at Alex Kennedy NBA on Twitter. That's a look at the Western Conference. Some really intriguing ones. The East, it's usually the Wild Wild West, but the East seems to be wide open here because Boston, Alex, snuck in and got the number 1 seed. So let's start with that one because I think the Bulls are a very intriguing matchup for the Celtics. I think the Celtics probably win it, but if you're looking at an 8-1 upset, maybe the Bulls can be that team that just kind of, had all this adversity all year long, but then you get to the right matchup in the playoff, and maybe they have it.
Well, I think they can challenge Boston and make things difficult because they're a veteran team. Certainly they have guys that know what it takes to win the playoffs. But like you said, they had diversity all year long, and I'm not a big believer in the Chicago team. Even from the start of the year, the way this team fits together just doesn't make much sense to me. And I think a really good coach like Brad Stevens is going to be able to game plan against them in a 7-game series and take away some of their weapons. They can't really shoot the ball. They are really inconsistent. I think they are better than that record indicates. So that 41-41, they're better than that. You look at their point differential and some of the games they had during the season. They're better than that. They're better than most 8 seeds. But I still think Boston's a much better team here. Really well coached, and I think guys like Isaiah Thomas and Al Horford are going to be huge. And then they have a lot of perimeter defenders to throw at, Jimmy Butler and Dwayne Wade and these other guys. When you talk about Avery Bradley, Marcus Smart, Jay Crowder, they have a lot of defenders. So I think it's an okay matchup for Boston. I could see Chicago challenging them in some of these games and keeping it close, but I think Boston ultimately advances in, I'll say 6 games, maybe 5, honestly, just because I do like this Boston team a bit more.
If the Bulls had a little bit more faith, or if Michael Carter-Williams could give them more, that would be intriguing with him on the floor playing the point, against Isaiah Thomas here. Because the one thing that's intriguing is Isaiah at 5'8", and somebody brought this up on our show yesterday, is, he's 5'8", going to the playoffs every single night where the game gets a little. Can he keep it up? Can he continue to play at this pace night in and night out in a playoff series? And then, of course, conversely, you don't have that rim protection. Dwayne Wade, Jimmy Butler. I mean, could those 2 guys really take it to another level come playoff time? That's what intrigues me so much about this one is, can Isaiah continue to play at this level, at the playoff level? And who's going to stop Jimmy Butler and Dwayne Wade if they're playing at a high level, taking the ball to the basket?
Yeah, I think the Isaiah Thomas thing is interesting. He's been really consistent throughout the year, but the playoffs are really tough when you're playing the same exact team over and over again. And he's a guy that relies on drives more than any player in the NBA. He led the NBA in drives per game and points per drive and all of that, points per game per drive. So he's a guy that's going to try to get to the basket. So that's where if you do have a guy like Carter Williams, or if Butler moves over and guards Thomas, you want to try to disrupt him at the rim. You almost want him settling for those threes and shooting, from outside, because he's going to hurt you in the paint, especially against a team, like you said, that doesn't really have a good shot blocker or rim protector. So, if Carter Williams can play well, that really changes things. But, the story of his career has been he's inconsistent, and, you don't really know what you're going to get from him. So it's kind of tough, but this matchup could be good for him. But I think that's a good thing about this Boston team. Even if Thomas struggles, there's other guys that can step up. Horford has been an all-star, and they have a number of guys they can rely on, knock down threes and contribute a little bit here and there. So Thomas doesn't have to do everything for this team. But certainly, yeah, it is an interesting matchup watching him against a guy like Butler, who, they almost acquired. They had trade talks at the deadline about Jimmy Butler, almost added him, and certainly they're going to try again this offseason. So that's another kind of thing to watch during the series. Butler, throughout the year, every time he played Boston, would never say anything negative about a single Celtics player. And I guarantee that's going to be the same case during the postseason, because he knows he could very well be wearing the same jersey as those guys next year.
Hey, just to chime in here, guys, I've been watching the 30 for 30 on the Bad Boy Pistons. The original Isaiah Thomas team had the Jordan rules. Could the Bulls implement the Isaiah rules in this one?
Yeah, you almost need to, right? And certainly if there's a team that's going to do it, it's going to be Chicago. Guys like Jimmy Butler and Dwayne Wade, and even like Rajon Rondo, they're very physical, and they are, known for being good defenders. So it's possible. I think, this team hasn't been great on the road. That's one reason why I'm kind of doubting them, and they haven't been great scoring the ball, but certainly defensively they can be physical, and they understand that there's a certain physicality that you have in the playoffs. I'm sure, Boston's going to be physical as well. That's kind of the kind of team they are. But, I mean, if you have bigger guys trying to, bump Isaiah, and if you're throwing 2 or 3 guys at him at times, certainly that's going to, kind of throw Boston off a little bit. And I think for Boston, they were hoping they could play Miami or Indiana. That's a better matchup for them. The fact that it is Chicago does make this a little more difficult for them. I'm sure they were kind of bummed about that drawing for them when it came to seeding.
Talk with Alex Kennedy, hooptype.com. That was a good 30 for 30, by the way. Isaiah with the Jordan rules there. They got the new Isaiah going against the Bulls. Pistons, that's a very interesting, dynamic there between those two things there. Let's look at the other ones in the East. All right, everyone Cavs, defensively, terrible. They're taking on this Pacers team. Number one, can the Cavs turn the switch on that defense, or are they just a bad defensive team? And number two, do you think the Pacers got any shot?
I do think the Cavs can flip a switch. I think we've seen with this team, especially with LeBron's teams, that there's a tendency to coast during the regular season, and then come playoff time, the ball movement gets better. His teammates knock down threes, and they play really intense defense. I think when you've been to as many finals in a row as he has, then there's a tendency to kind of coast and wait for the playoffs to start. And now, his teammates are all guys who have playoff experience too. So in the past, they may have been more aggressive during the regular season, but when you're the defending champion, you do rest more. You do kind of take games off. And I think every team kind of goes through that. So I'm not as worried defensively as some people are. I do think there's a concern there. Don't get me wrong. This team has not played well at all defensively. I think they rank, bottom in the bottom 10 in the NBA, and that's certainly a problem. But I do think they can be better in the playoffs. And fortunately for them, a team like Indiana struggles to score the ball. They're not putting up a ton of points per game. This year they won 42 games. Paul George has played really well in the second half of the season, and I like Miles Turner an awful lot. But, guys like Jeff Teague, he's been a little bit inconsistent, some of the other guys there. So I'm not too worried about them in this series. This could be the kind of series where we see them kind of get into postseason mode and kind of ease into playing really well. And then by next round and by the Eastern Conference Finals, we're looking at a Cavs team that's kind of clicking more on all cylinders and, knocking down shots and moving the ball really well and playing good defense and switching. That's kind of what they've done in the past, where the regular season it's not really a big indicator of what they're going to do in the postseason.
Alex, Raptors Bucks, you talked about it at the top as an intriguing one. If I'm Toronto, they're playing well. They got Lowry back. They're feeling better. This is not the matchup I'm looking for in round one.
No, it's really not. I mean, Giannis Antetokounmpo is the best player in this series, and he just led Milwaukee in every stat category, and he's just so good, and he's going to be a big matchup problem for this team. Fortunately, Toronto has other pieces, other than Kyle Lowry, who's going to be the point guard that's against Giannis. They have DeMar DeRozan. They went out and had, Serge Ibaka and PJ Tucker to their core at the trade deadline. I like those moves, but I think Toronto advances, and, the fact that they have home court advantage is really good for them. You look at Milwaukee and Chicago. These are two teams that have struggled on the road. So that's where, teams like Boston and Toronto that have been very good at home and have a really good home crowd, it's going to help them a lot. So I think both those teams advance. I think Toronto ends up advancing, but don't be surprised if this series goes 6 or 7 games, because Milwaukee is very talented, and they are playing their better basketball in the second half of the season with Chris Middleton back and some of the other players.
You look at the other one, Washington and Atlanta. I think Atlanta, just nobody ever takes them serious. They're always just the Hawks. Thanks for coming. Here's your participation trophy. This Wizards team, though, doesn't have a lot of playoff experience. So can the Hawks, who never get the respect, even in a 62-win season, they got nothing, can the Hawks basically tell everybody who's jumping on this Wizards wagon to, hey, don't get too excited?
No, I don't think so. I'm going to continue to crap on the Hawks. I'm sorry, Atlanta fans, but I am not a fan of this team. I think this could be a really short series. There's a reason I think Toronto-Milwaukee is more exciting and interesting than this series. The Wizards, I think, are playing really good basketball this season, especially in the second half. Once they figure out how to play under Scott Brooks and really maximize, his offensive and defensive systems, they've been great. John Wall and Bradley Beal are both averaging over 23 points. They've been efficient. John Wall is probably the most underrated star in the NBA right now. He's averaging 23 points, over 10 assists, 2 steals, 5 rebounds. I mean, he's playing great basketball, but not getting enough credit for it. And then this Atlanta team, they've just been so inconsistent. And just like, the other teams we talked talked about, they've struggled on the road. So for Washington to get that 4th seed and have the home court advantage in the series, it's going to be huge for them. And a guy like Wall, he steps up in the postseason. And actually, Beal has too. You look in the past, they were a team that before injuries each year, in the last 2 years have been pretty scary. Last year obviously was a down year for them, but whenever they were in the postseason over the last 2-3 years, they've really done well. And Wall's put up monster numbers. Beal's been really good, knocked down threes. I like this Washington team a lot. I think they could be pretty interesting moving forward.
Alex Kennedy, hoopshype.com here on the Sports Bash 97.3 ESPN. Will there be an upset in round one?
If there is, I think it's going to be Utah over LA, and then maybe Milwaukee over Toronto. I mean, I know we talked about those series, but those are the two that kind of stand out to me. I have those going 7 games. And once you get to a game 7, if you're the away team, that's all you can really ask for. And both of these teams, Milwaukee and Utah, are teams that are very young, that are up and coming, that have no pressure on them. And teams like Toronto and LA are, 2 teams that are bringing back the same core after several years and the same head coach and have all these high expectations and went out and made moves to go on a deep postseason run. Both of these teams believe that they're a contender, a championship contender, whereas I think Milwaukee and Utah, they're almost happy to be here and want to play spoiler. So that's always interesting to me whenever you have a group of, they're, inexperienced in some cases, and that's, a concern. But you also, I think, get to a game 7 and you look at these guys that are kind of playing with house money and have no pressure, no expectations. That could make for an upset sometimes.
Phil Jackson today, real quick, said Carmelo Anthony would be better off someplace else. Is it inevitable that Carmelo is gone?
Yeah, and I don't know what he's doing. I mean, why say that? Because, first of all, it's going to hurt his trade value because now you basically told every team that you're going to get rid of him and that there's no way to work it out. He's not going to be back next season. He made that comment and a few others that were really negative. And then Carmelo responded on Instagram, and a bunch of NBA players, Chris Paul, Knicks teammates were liking it. It looks bad for the franchise. It doesn't help you when you're going trying to recruit another star player or other free agents when you're, being very negative about Carmelo, who has tons of friends around the NBA, and it doesn't help you from a trade leverage standpoint. I don't get it. I don't know what he's doing and why he would say that.
All right, come for all the NBA playoffs. Follow him on Twitter, Alex Kennedy NBA. And a lot of Sixers stuff, too, that we didn't get a chance to get into. Brian Colangelo spoke today regarding Ben Simmons and Joel Embiid, but we'll have to shelve that for a little bit another time. We're in the offseason where I'm sure the Sixers will be making some news as well. Alex, enjoy the playoff games this weekend, pal.
You too. By the way, we have all the Sixers quotes on hoopsite.com under the Sixers section, so easy place to go check all those out.